learning about the way that our mindset, our fixed mindset generates feelings of being less than is critical. Building a growth mindset, right? But a lot of times you hear people say, well, growth mindset, build a growth mindset. But I think the participants don't often know how to do that. This simple practice quite literally led to very palpable changes in their imposter syndrome.
What is well-being? How do we take care of ourselves? How do we show up for ourselves as lawyers, as people? In 2025, wellness, the demands of it, the standing and effort that's required to improve our self-care has changed. We think that we're taking care of ourselves when we're scrolling on our phone or when we're hanging out on the couch. But the reality is we're just revving up our nervous systems. And today you're going to meet someone who's going to help guide this conversation very impactfully. I've appreciated his work for a very long time. You're going to come to find out how I learned about this particular individual. But first, a quick background. Today you're going to meet Jarrett Green. Jarrett is an attorney, a writer, a consultant, and specifically works with attorneys in well-being, helping them understand and train from a neuroscience perspective, from a psychological perspective, from a practical and actionable perspective, what you can do to take care of yourself. But this doesn't just apply to attorneys, it applies to you too, and you're going to see why. Please welcome my friend, Mr. Jarrett Green. How are you today, sir?
I'm good, sir. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Hey, man, this has been a long time coming. I think we've been back and forth about this for months, but you're the co-founder of your consultancy, we'll call it your consulting practice, NKB Consultancy. How did you get into this space of well-being, and why does it mean so much to you?
I got into this space of well-being because I completely and totally lacked well-being. Well, when I was a lawyer for 12 years before leaving the law about a decade ago. But when I was a lawyer, especially for the first 8, 10 years, I just struggled deeply. No one knew it. Everyone thought I had all my stuff together because I basically presented a veneer of calm, cool, and collected at all times. But, the whole duck syndrome, calm on the, and underneath, that's what I was. Inside, I was in total panic mode most of the time. I was too scared also of being viewed by others, by myself, as a failure, as weak for asking for help. So I didn't ask for help. And I just basically, grit my teeth and bear it. At a certain point, it was just too much and I needed help. I got some support from this amazing coach and therapist who to this day is my primary guide, and she's amazing. I've worked with lots of different people since then. But I think internally, the practice of law, business, no matter what we do, it's highly stressful. It's overwhelming to the nervous system, as we've talked about. And, we're given so much education in our society as kids growing up on, world history and geometry and algebra and all types of things, biology, all these great things. But I never, when I was struggling as a lawyer with my self-worth, with my happiness, with my anxiety, at no point did I say, I wonder what the 10th grade algebra class, how will that help me right now in processing the things? Oh, I'm taking out all of my emotions on everyone else in my life. Let's look to biology 101. It's totally and utterly useless. So I decided I am totally uneducated when it comes to what truly matters in life: emotional well-being, happiness, thriving, fulfillment, conscious communication, optimizing my brain while feeling overwhelmed. So I thought, since I don't know any of this, and here I am in my late 20s and I never got educated on this, I need to find the people who have mastered this stuff and learn from them. So that's kind of how I got into it. And then the more I got into it, the more passionate I got, and it really just turned into my life's work over time.
So just backing up a bit, I mean, it wasn't just any firm. We're talking about Skadden Arps, and you also happen to have a degree in psychology, a master's. How and why did you pursue the degree? Was that already pre-existing for getting into the space of well-being?
Yeah, so that was after the 12 years as a lawyer. And yes, as you said, Skadden, I was blessed to work there, an amazing firm, and also a firm with very high standards and a lot of stress. So I got to I got to experience, I think, the type of stress that a lot of people feel throughout the country, and I can really relate to the stress they're dealing with because I've been in a high stress environment. When I left the practice of law after couple of years of this passion building, and I, found yoga and meditation, and I started spending time in India whenever I could. And I was no longer at Skadden at the time. I had my own firm. But this became so critical to me. How can I experience greater inner peace, joy amidst all of the chaos of running your own business, right? Of having your own firm, of litigating, and also have better control over my cognition so that I'm more effective, my brain functions better, I'm a better lawyer, but also a happier one, right? And that work started to lead to results, and then people just started coming up to me, basically. I had friends from law school reaching out to me, colleagues in the legal industry, sometimes opposing counsel when cases would end. They'd say, "Can we meet for coffee? You seem to be handling all of this chaos a little bit differently than the rest of us. Can I pick your brain a little bit?" So I just, for the last couple of years before I left the law, I was just meeting up with people, trying to pass along the wisdom that I received and in little tight nuggets. And then the more I did this, I realized everyone is struggling. Everyone needs support in this way. And I thought, maybe I can just do this for a living. And I love doing it. I love being of service. It felt super meaningful. And at that point, it had been, a few years of me really digging deep and researching stuff and traveling places. And I thought most people don't have this kind of time. So what I can do is I can be a conduit. So I thought, to help me become a better conduit, I can also get a master's in psychology and really understand the human brain, and the process of, the generation of emotions, generation of cognitions. That was my focus, really, in my master's program. And then I could help people. I could be of greater service when I come back to the industry.
It's was such a self-aware and impactful thing to do. I always think like if I was going to pursue another degree, I have a JD MBA, but part of me wishes that I would have pursued that degree in psychology, but I don't think I would have been ready if I had to. Ironically, and I'm kind of curious your take. How do you feel like your experience as an attorney impacted for a decade, impacted your ability to get a master's? Did you find that you were taking in the information at a higher clip? Did you relate to it better? Can you talk about that process?
All of the above. I love what you said, that you don't even know if you would have been ready back then. You know, I felt like I got marinated by life. I was soaking in life and all the stressors and challenges of life, so that when I went and got the master's in psychology, you are totally right, and we've never talked about that, but you're so intuitive, like, that's exactly what it was. I think I received, I absorbed, I evaluated the information, the teachings completely differently. Well, how old was I? I was 36 years old as a, be starting my program in master's. And I remember on the first day after like getting admitted, before the first day of class, you could go on campus and, meet with the academic success person or whoever. And I was there, and there were some other students, and they were like scrolling on their phones, and they were like, and I was just like, I was like the eager beaver, and I was so excited to be there. And then the woman came out, and she's like, a nice woman who's been there for like 30 years, I later found out. And she was just like over it. She's like, "Mr. Green?" I was like, "Yes." She's like, "Let me walk you through some of the options." And I said, "Great." And then she started to take me around. And after a while, she paused and she goes, "You seem really excited to be here." And I was like, "Oh, yeah." I'm like, "I am fired up." She's like, "I haven't seen this level of excitement in most of our students." I was like, "You know what? Because I've been a full-time lawyer for 12 years, and I'm still excited to be a student again." So I came in with a deep hunger. I think that I probably went to law school from a place of, I know I wanted to be of service. I wanted to learn skills that I could fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves. So I think it came from a noble motive, which is the case, I think, for a lot of people. And then I think I didn't necessarily live my life in full alignment with those values, right? I think there was a deep yearning when I went into the master's. It's like, I am going to learn this stuff specifically. I'm not doing it for prestige or money,
Right.
or I'm doing it literally because I want to. Obviously, I still want to be able to, like, pay for my food and have a roof over my head. But I'm doing
Alignment.
this right. I'm doing this primarily because I want to be of service. So coming in when you really already know also the taste and flavor of stress, of overwhelm, of seeing all the difficulties of our profession, of life, I felt like I was so advantaged because now I could learn everything through the lens of everything that I knew I wanted to do and be. It wasn't theoretical. It was a very practical experience where I was constantly thinking, "Ooh, I can share this with people. Ooh, how would I translate this to people who are super busy and don't have time to do this?" So, yeah, so I think the timing was amazing. I think if I did it at the time you did your MBA, I think it would have been valuable, but not nearly as valuable. So it was perfect timing for me.
You probably also felt, and forgive me if I'm speaking on your behalf, like you were going to figure a bunch of shit out. Like a lot of dots would connect and things that you understood intuitively or otherwise from what you were passionate about or what you're experiencing. Everything was going to kind of fall into place because you were, yes, alignment and everything beautiful, la, la, la. But at the same time, like, I'm chasing answers and I'm trying to write about these things. I'm trying to talk about these things. I'm trying to educate about these things so I could take in information at a higher clip, seek a higher understanding, to offer more insight, to be of more value, to your point.
I think you're totally right. I think that that's undoubtedly the case. And I think there's probably something about our education system that it's a little bit at times cart before the horse. Maybe I'm not saying there's a better way of doing it. I have no idea, but mostly, right, we're getting educated without any of that context, without any of those dots. I think some MBAs, right, they often prefer people to have a little bit of world
Yeah.
experience. Is that true?
Yeah.
Yeah, but less so in the law, or less, at least when I was in law school. So I think that's right. I think the connecting the dots was a very fascinating thing for sure.
Because it doesn't really make sense if you pursue the degree without the experience. It's just the theoretical. And like, yes, you can be an expert witness in a trial or some form of a consultant. But I think that something that, is being, the curtain is being peeled back upon is this idea that if you haven't built it, how can you just theorize about it and actually offer a meaningful opinion about what should and shouldn't work if you don't have any revenue tied to a particular business venture that you have pursued because you've been teaching it, for example, right? So I think that the idea of going into the world and getting some real world experience before pursuing higher education is a practical thing. How it's evolved over time, I think. I mean, especially as someone who's 2 graduate school degrees, like, it's interesting. I'm proud of the degree. I know it's done something for me in terms of how I think about things and can evaluate a situation, especially having gone through law school with business electives and then taking the bar and then going to business school while applying to DA's offices, like this back and forth in my brain, trying to take on all these different pieces of information did something, but the substance of the business, I can't say resonated most. I think it was just the work capacity that was improving and the ability to take in all these different topics that helped me kind of wrap my head around, all right, this is how things work economically or management wise. But I've learned more from reading books, autobiographies, podcasts, YouTube than I have just like theorizing about things. And I don't think that's a knock on any graduate school degree. I think that continuing education is important.
Well, even that self-awareness, I think, is beautiful because you've married the two. You got the formal 2 degrees, postgraduate degrees. You got the MBA, but a lot of people who get MBAs feel like they've already then mastered business and then they just kind of go forward. Or there are a lot of people, like me, I love to read like, business type books and, journeys of entrepreneurs and things like that without the technical leadership, management, business skills. So I think it's very unique that you have that foundational mastery of having the MBA, but then you also have really learned in the real world. So I think that's beautiful.
Thanks, man. Well, I want to talk about some of the stuff that you've figured out. So the way that I came across your work was in legal verse media. I was looking to write. I got in touch with the editor through a mutual connection. Someone else suggested we connect. I started doing my due diligence on them and your work came up and I like devoured it. And I was like, oh my God, this guy, I gotta talk to him and learn about what he's doing. And I think that happened. I wrote for them in December. It was published, I don't know, a couple months after, but I'd read your work around November, December. That really set me on this path over the last few months. Now I could tell you to your face, set me down on this path over the last few months to train over 800 attorneys on well-being and mental resilience and mental fitness, as I've come to learn it in my world through multiple bar associations, firms, government organizations, all these different entities, and the feedback has been special. But I attribute that inflection point to two people. One, Jordana Confino, who knows how I feel about her. She's a fantastic mentor, resource. She's been on the podcast. And you in your work and kind of pointing a light and shining a light on what well-being looks like for lawyers. So in that spirit, what is well-being?
Well, first of all, thank you very much. I'm very humbled to hear that. I'm a big fan of Jordana. She's a buddy of mine. So I'm so happy to hear that I've had some positive impact on you in your journey. And that's amazing that in such a short period, you've already trained up 800, over 800 attorneys since, what did you say, end of last year?
January.
Of this year?
Yeah.
That's really incredible. That's amazing.
Nice.
Wow.
Nice.
That's incredible because in my experience, the first year is the hardest period to break through to build. So I think it's going to just be exponential. So that's amazing. Congratulations. That was not my experience in 2015, by the way. We can talk about that later. I was just sitting at an empty computer waiting for emails to come in, and they never came in. But once in a while, they'd come in and it would just say, "We're not interested." And I'd be like, "I got a response. I got a response." So I got very excited. But I'm so happy that you're having such success early. That's incredible.
Thank you. You're a pioneer in the space in a lot of ways, right? Like you're one of the original ones. So you made it, yeah, you made it easier for people to come in and really talk about these things because I mean, we'll talk about it, but lawyers in general just don't take their well-being seriously. And there's the data, the survey data that supports it. You know, you'll educate us a bit on that. I'll talk to it a bit as much as I understand it and know it. But going back to the question, what is well-being? Why does it matter?
There's so many, right? There's so many definitions of well-being. I don't know. What was that? The Justice Potter quote for that famous Supreme Court case. I don't know how to define it, but I know it when I see it.
Top
So
point.
I'm not sure if I have, even though since it's kind of what I do for a living, I should probably have a definition of well-being, but I don't. But I kind of feel like it's a sense of, that there's another expression that when your thoughts, words, and actions are in alignment, right? And I've had values. So when your values, thoughts, words, and actions are in alignment, I think that's a key aspect of well-being. I think I would probably say the ability to regulate your nervous system and your brain in a way that it generates emotions that make life feel good and it generates cognitions that make you more effective at your work. I think it's not like super pithy, but to me, well-being involves both the emotional, you know, joy, the fulfillment, feeling kind of good in our own skin, but also the ability to feel like we're actively contributing to the world in some way. So that involves for a lot of us optimizing our thinking, our performance, all of that. And I think that's part of well-being.
So when it comes to your understanding of well-being and how you've gone about educating the legal profession on it from a neuroscience perspective, from a psychological perspective, where do you start? Where do you take them? And where do you leave the audience?
I definitely take a science-based approach because our entire profession is so evidence-based, even though ironically, we're probably the most anti-evidence profession when it comes to the science of well-being, of decision-making, of leadership, of management. So putting aside that as a profession, we're probably the most anti-evidentiary profession in existence. In theory, our profession is premised on evidence. So I think that most of us, because we've been so indoctrinated in this profession, evidence is God, anything related to evidence. So when we lead with evidence, it creates an unconscious fear. Not that I want to rule by fear or influence people by fear, but an unconscious fear that I will be irrational if I reject evidence. If I reject science, I'm irrational. I think in a lot of non-legal environments, you can do a lot of well-being related work without being as evidence-based. But I think in our profession, I think it really helps to be heavy on the evidence, heavy on the science, because it hooks into that unconscious bias in favor of evidence, science, proof. It also drops very quickly the unconscious resistance. But I also think it's really critical to tie well-being to performance, to performance optimization, because a large number of studies show that really high achievers, highly ambitious people, if they're told that essentially making behavioral changes will lead to greater well-being or greater joy in life or better relationships or better connections with your children, the vast majority of good-hearted people will say, that sounds great, but I'm too busy for that right now. I'll get to that later. But if they find out that this behavioral change could increase their brain's performance, make them more likely to succeed in their work or get more clients or get that promotion or make partner or whatever the external objective is, even though I'm not a big fan of extrinsic motivation as the key motivator, when it comes to well-being, the reality, in my opinion, is that's the most powerful way to influence groups, large groups. So I'm big on actually leveraging external motivation in order to induce internal motivation. But my job is to use whatever tools I can to try to help people help themselves and build a greater sense of internal motivation. But ironically, I find external motivation to be a great, powerful way to do that. And also, it's got to be fun and entertaining. Enough with these really boring CLEs. There's a reason why you've already spoken to 800 people, because you bring life and energy and vibrancy and entertainment and edge. But no one wants their eyes to roll to the back of their head and saliva to be dripping down while some guy's talking about wellness. So that's critical. And then also tangibility, giving people tangible tools that they can implement literally the very next day, I think is critical, because no matter how interesting information relating to wellness is, no matter how relevant statistics are, and I understand some people like to start with statistics to establish foundation, ultimately a program is not very useful if the people who attend are walking away and not able the very next day to change some of their behavior. So to me, that's what we were talking about before, the difference between theoretical knowledge and practical implementation. As educators, I think our goal should be to be able to catalyze practical implementation.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Inside the Inspired. My name is Jonathan Cohen, and I have a quick favor to ask you. If you're getting any value out of this content, please take a second to subscribe to the channel. You help us reach more people, and you can also stay up to date with all the latest content coming your way. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll catch you in the episode.
Let's talk about some of those tangible takeaways for a second. I'll focus you on two. Let's talk about self-sabotage. Let's talk about imposter syndrome. What are some actionable takeaways you'd offer someone, an attorney or a professional who's struggling right now with identifying a form of self-sabotage in their life or imposter syndrome? Feel free to take you in whatever direction you're comfortable with.
I think when it comes to imposter syndrome, right, it's so widespread. We also know that a huge number of very successful celebrities experience it, right? I think some statistics show that in the 80%, approximately 80% of people experience imposter syndrome. It's so interesting because I think our profession probably experiences imposter syndrome at an even higher clip. And one reason for that is I think it attracts a certain type of personality that is really harsh on oneself and constantly focused on the negative, and then our brains get further socialized and indoctrinated to do that, right? But also because our profession is actually one that involves constantly new information, no matter what the matter is, it's often new information or new contexts or new types of transactions or new types of backgrounds, right? Or new dynamics with opposing counsel or new relationships with co-counsel. There's so much novelty in our profession. And also, many ambitious people are always trying to grow and expand and do new things and elevate their game. Well, when you elevate your game, you're going to struggle with confidence in the beginning. I'm forgetting who said this, but essentially, you actually can only build confidence after demonstrating competence, but you can't have competence when you're doing new stuff. So you literally, the necessary part of professional mastery and continued growth is you have to continually feel a lack of self-confidence. What's the difference between lack of self-confidence and imposter syndrome? That's a fascinating conversation that could be a whole podcast episode on its own. But what I will say is so many of the things that got normalized into our profession, contribute to imposter syndrome, right? Having a fixed mindset, learning about the way that our fixed mindset generates feelings of being less than is critical. Building a growth mindset, right? But a lot of times you hear people say, well, build a growth mindset. But I think the participants don't often know how to do that. One thing I like to share, I call it the Thomas Edison question. I go through and describe Thomas Edison, blah, 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 the 1,000 failed light bulbs he didn't know. He was asked afterwards by a journalist famously, how did you have the wherewithal, the resilience, the steadfast to continue after 1,000 failed light bulbs and not give up? And he said, I didn't have 1,000 failed light bulbs. Each light bulb that didn't succeed, I actually learned something from. I extracted all that information, and then I was able to invent the light bulb, right? So he had a natural growth mindset where he wasn't viewing the quote failed light bulbs as a sign he was failing. He viewed them as critical to developing long-term expertise, mastery, and essentially illuminating the world with his invention, right? So how do we translate that? I like to call it the Thomas Edison question. It's in our first book. But every time I make an error or a mistake, and I recommend other people try this, instead of what our brain is wired to do, which is because of the negativity bias to filter out all the neutrals, all of the great things we've done, our brain just hones in on the mistake, how embarrassing it is, how horrifying it is, how they're going to lose respect for us. I can't believe I did this, right? Which is why so many of us, we could do 14 amazing things in a row. We make one mistake, and that's all we can obsess about at night when we're trying to fall asleep, right? Well, it's because our brain is literally focusing itself entirely on the horror of the error, right? So the Thomas Edison question that I like to ask myself, it's super simple, is what is one lesson that I can extract from this error or mistake that will make me a better lawyer, a better teammate, or a better person? And what is interesting about that is, as lawyers, we've all been indoctrinated from day one of law school to respond to questions. If there's a pending question, our brain is actually wired to access the ability to answer it. And our reward centers have now been really wired to start even releasing dopamine in anticipation of answering a question. So our neurochemistry actually starts to shift the second we ask ourselves a question. So we start asking that simple question. And if we can just identify one thing, our brain actually diverts its attention from the horror of the error to the glory of the growth, right? Being able to identify one thing. And it's a very specific thing, but it's actually a major neural shift. And the more we do that over time, the more our brain starts defaulting to being able to identify constant areas of growth, and they can be small and tiny. But we actually start to raise our baseline level of resiliency, right? So the Thomas Edison question is super simple, and I find it helpful. I mean, I do that in my personal life. It happens all the time. I screw something up or I upset my wife, right? And it's like, okay, I totally screwed that up, right? Well, now can I identify, instead of just feeling awful about it or going into a shame spiral, can I identify, okay, this is going to repeat itself, this context, this situation. In that situation, what is one thing I can do differently? I can ask an open-hearted question instead of making a statement. I can wait 10 seconds before making the statement. I can reflect, is there something that I might have said that might have contributed to her reaction, right? Whatever the thing is, but in each instance, if we can just, it causes a cognitive diversion into particularity where there's a natural tendency for growth, and it takes away a lot of that shame. So anyway, like that could be one example. There's so many different tools. I'm a big fan of success charting, right? Because of the negativity bias, our brain completely filters out so much of the great things, the valuable things we do. We make one mistake and we feel absolutely awful. And then our brain has a distorted perception of how competent we are. And that's a very real aspect of imposter syndrome. And that's why there's often incongruence between our perception of our own competence and other people's perception of our competence, right? It's actually a cognitive distortion that's occurring. And one reason is because other people are observing us more accurately. So we're literally having an inaccurate perception of self. One reason for that, or the primary reason for that, is because we're focused too much on all the negatives and all the mistakes and artificially inflating them while simultaneously filtering out all the neutral and mostly like all the positive and wonderful things we do. Well, since the brain is wired to filter out those things, a very simple thing that I recommend, and a lot of people have reached out to me over the years and said this simple practice quite literally led to very palpable changes in their imposter syndrome and self-confidence. But on a Friday afternoon, I recommend at the end of every Friday, whenever everyone sends their last email on a Friday, even if you have to work on the weekend, there's something really nice about sending the last email of the week on a Friday. And it's like there's this subtle exhale, right? Put your phone on 60 seconds on the alarm clock and then write it down. Write down just one word or two words max for every single impressive or good or positive thing you did in your work that week. And just get as many down as possible, stream of consciousness for 60 seconds. I'd recommend 120 seconds. That's like amazing. But if most people don't even want to give 2 minutes, and it's super easy to start with just 60 seconds. We can all do anything I could be waterboarded for 60 seconds. We could do almost anything for 60 seconds. We can certainly write down our great wins over the week, small and big, for 60 seconds. The alarm goes off. And what's very interesting is almost everyone who tries this at the beginning will have less than 10 victories that they're able to identify in 60 seconds. Probably 5 to 6 most people, but it'll be less than 10 for almost anyone. But they probably had dozens and dozens and dozens of victories. Their brain literally can't see it. In week 2, next Friday, one Friday later, they do the same thing. Their brain will be able in 60 seconds to write down 14 or 15. In week 3, 17 or 18. And in week 4, the fourth time, it's going to be over 20, almost guaranteed. What's happening there is just through a 60-second commitment, their brain is being forced once a week to focus and use that intellectual firepower to sift through all of the days and identify successes, acts of competency, victories, strengths, right? And then the brain is, in literally that short of a period, is starting to get slowly rewired. And now it's starting to notice those things much more effectively, right? On its own. And it's starting to default. And then when it's time on the fourth Friday to notice, it starts noticing things that it just was missing, right? That causes actually, it's not just a cute and fun exercise. What's happening when we can much more effectively recognize our strengths 4 weeks later, it means our brain is actually no longer filtering out our weaknesses, our strengths at such a disproportionate rate in comparison to our weaknesses. So our brain is actually getting more calibrated to accuracy. So then throughout the week, even though we're only doing it once a week, throughout the week, our brain is slowly becoming less distorted, and we're observing more of our strengths, our successes in real time. And then naturally, our perception of our competence starts to increase and gets closer to our actual competence, and thereby decreases the imposter syndrome, which is the inversion of that. So there's a bunch of different little things we can do, but we got to do the work. We got to do the work. It doesn't necessarily take that long, but are we willing, right? How often do we brush our teeth? I'd say most people brush their teeth twice a day, right? 30 seconds, 60 seconds, whatever, right? And it's like, because we believe in the awareness that, sure, brushing your teeth once is not going to turn you into the most gorgeous, beautiful teeth in the history of teeth. But the consistency, 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 120 seconds, right? Twice a day, it has massive cumulative effects, right? Well, imposter syndrome is not going to be wiped out by one cool webinar, but 60 seconds or 100 seconds once a week for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, you're literally going to have imposter syndrome tartar removed. You're going to have self-doubt plaque fall away. That's all for the metaphors. But it's a matter, I think, instead of death by 1,000 cuts or imposter syndrome, lack of confidence, exhaustion, fatigue, adrenaline, overwhelm, all that stuff by 1,000 cuts, I think it's energy, it's self-confidence, it's vibrancy, it's resilience by 1,000 cuts. So that's what I'm all about, is trying to give people small little tools. No one's going to go up to the top of a mountain every day for 3 hours and meditate. Like, that's great. I love meditation. I do it every morning. I don't think most people in the legal profession want to do a lot of meditation, but you can do 60 seconds here of this, 60 seconds there in the afternoon of that, 60 seconds right after showering or after dinner with your family or your friend of this, right? Those small little actions can significantly compound. So we not only get short-term benefits right after the practice, but even more importantly, we're slowly rewiring our brain, and our baseline levels of resiliency, focus, and cognition and confidence, right? And vibrancy and willpower start to tick up as well.
That is incredible, man, because it helps reinforce, you mentioned it before, optimal performance. I noticed you didn't say high performance. I sat down with former Navy SEAL Commander Rich Diviney, who wrote a book called The Attributes, and he delineates between high performance and optimal performance. And like that focus that you drove on that in particular word shows that we chase this peak performance and don't understand that it's really about that optimization. And optimal doesn't mean that you're in peak performance mode, have like perfect recovery every single day. It's more about that you're making the most of what you have when you have it, and things aren't always great because this isn't going right, that's not going right, and you have to be able to show up based on where you're at, not where the ideal scenario is, and pinpointing these things that are going well throughout the week, or asking yourself more effective questions to spend less time overthinking and more time in action makes a effective and tangible difference in someone's life. And it reinforces this point of mental strength. How do you define mental strength and resilience?
Yeah, I'd probably define them similarly, but I think the ability to respond to things that life bring that we don't like or that's unexpected, right? And to maintain our ability to function, to thrive in response to it, because isn't that what life is, right? It's just a constant series of unpredictable curveballs that are thrown at us, right? So to me, one's mental strength, right, and resiliency is just the ability to respond to those things while maintaining grace, cool, focus, and sometimes it does involve getting flustered, but recovering quickly. I think that's key because we're all gonna get triggered. We're all gonna get flustered. Like, I don't think that's a lack of resilience. Maybe that's the highest form of resilience, but a more common and a more realistic version of resilience is when we get triggered and when we get thrown off our game, which is unless you're kind of a saint, that's gonna happen plenty for all of us. How can I recover much more quickly, right? If we can recover instead of it taking, someone sent me an email a couple weeks ago and said that it used to take him, he has these challenging family dynamics, and it used to take him sometimes months to recover from these awkward family events where they would say mean things and undercut him. And really just his value was every time he do these family gatherings, it was a really upsetting thing. And he said, now I recover in like 30 minutes, like basically by the time I get home. So like, should someone not be triggered by something so intense? Of course, like you're human, you have an open heart, things hurt, things feel unfair, right? But then the ability to recover quickly, I think, is a critical aspect of it. How does that resonate with you?
It's like, I don't know if you saw me nodding and smiling, but like that's everything that I talk about. It's all about how you can bring yourself back to center, spending less time in that. But like Ray Dalio talks about it in his book Principles when he draws out that circular diagram. And that's I read that book maybe back in like 2019, 2020, something like that. And it kind of opened my eyes to this idea of, okay, this is what a problem looks like. Something happens and then you get upset and then you think about it and then you figure out how to solve it and then you go on to the next problem. And he has nicer words for it, but layman's terms. And his whole point was the faster you can recover, the more effective you'll be in how you go about solving and dealing with the things in your life. So less time in thought, more time in action, to the earlier point. And the definition of resilience that I usually train or educate on is this idea that comes from Stoic sports scholar and endurance athlete Ross Edgley, where he defines it as suffering strategically managed. So what he does is he talks about breaking things down into manageable steps. He's done some like really incredible if you listen to this podcast before, you know how I feel about Ross Edgley and the things that he's done. So I'm not going to list his resume, but he's done some crazy things.
Yeah.
And so he talks about breaking down his intense challenges into like micro steps. So this way he's not trying to accomplish everything all at once, live a week in a day, but more take things piece by piece by piece. And you talked about a few keywords in there: self-compassion and focus. And mental strength is that ability to actively bring yourself back to that center, knowing that even if you're off kilter, you gotta, we hear grit, right? But grit, as Angela Duckworth defines it, as passion and perseverance, right? So not so much that grind, because that takes more energy. Having compassion is actually what fills us up. And I know this from personal experience in running marathons, ultra marathons, also strength endurance, being in the field as a soldier, as a criminal prosecutor, like all these different things, like being in it. Coming down on myself doesn't get me the outcome that I want. And I'm trying to get things done. And I can't get things done if I get in my own way. And I'm constantly pointing the finger at all the people that are getting in my way instead of me getting in my own way, realizing, hey, this is a time to be kind to myself, not excuse poor performance, not eliminate excuses, but instead create space to assess so you can review and recover, to your point, bring yourself back to center. I mean, I'm reading a lot of Phil Jackson lately, Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, Tim Grover. So I'm like in my basketball era. I know you posted recently about LeBron and his leadership, which I very much agreed with you on. And, you know, having seen what success looks like at that level and curating those inputs deliberately, realizing the importance of presence and focus and compassion, like these are things that can tangibly change someone's life. So it very much resonated with me.
I love that. Everything you said really resonates. And I think self-compassion, have you read Kristen Neff's work?
What's his name?
Kristen Neff. So she's definitely highly recommended. She's kind of like the equivalent that Brene Brown is to vulnerability. She's in self-compassion.
Oh,
So
interesting.
she's been studying self-compassion for a couple decades, I think, and has done so many. I mean, her first book, highly recommended, is called appropriately Self-Compassion. But she, I'd say she's probably like the most refined expert in the world on self-compassion, and she's run so many studies as well. And it validates everything you said so often. So first of all, I think self-compassion, I was just talking to a firm yesterday about this, and I was talking to the leaders, and the leaders were concerned about talking about self-compassion because they said it might be perceived by some of the lawyer, they might get a little squirrely with it or whatever. And I said, I totally understand that. Here's how I will deliver it, because it's designed to overcome that resistance. But our profession has taught us that, well, self-compassion, it just sounds like we're soft, like we're weak, like we're just sitting around giving ourselves hugs, singing Kumbaya and giving ourselves little cuddles all day. And there's a complacency, a concern that, okay, if I give myself self-compassion after making mistakes, then that's encouraging myself to continue to make mistakes and not raise the bar. But here's what all of the research has shown, Kristen Neff's and others. Research shows that harsh self-judgment actually makes us significantly more likely to repeat the same mistakes and to not grow and learn from mistakes. And self-compassion does the opposite. And why? Why does the research show that? Because when we have a high amount of self-judgment when we make a mistake, we feel so much shame in looking at ourselves and the mistake, right? It's so painful if we're judging ourselves so intensely that looking at the nuances and subtleties that led to the mistakes itself is so painful that we don't extract those critical learning lessons, right? So in order to grow from our mistakes, we have to like deeply understand them. We have to understand the nuances. We have to understand the contributing factors. We have to see patterns of mistakes over time. But if we have deep shame over our mistakes because we lack self-compassion, it's kind of like staring at the sun, like it's too much, it's too painful. and we deprive ourselves of the ability to grow and learn. So there's so much research showing also that it's also, it sounds selfish. It's like self-indulgent. Like I'm just sitting here, self-compassion. Like, get over it. You made a mistake. Get over it. No, the research shows people who actively practice self-compassion are significantly less selfish. They engage in more altruistic behaviors. People who are self-judgmental engage in more selfish behavior. So what the science has shown is all of the myths around self-compassion have been disproven, and that it's actually self-judgment that's the big danger. And self-compassion, of course, does not mean self-delusion. There's a reason why those are different words. They're literally different words for a reason. Self-compassion is an accurate awareness of self and the mistakes we make, while simultaneously having an empathy, right, for ourselves as the human who made the mistakes, and a desire to grow and improve. So yeah, so I actually think totally in alignment with you that self-compassion is a critical skill. It's not just like an ability or a propensity. It's a learnable skill. But almost all of us, right? We never learned that skill growing up. So that's it's a sitting duck for all of us. If we can increase our self-compassion and make that an intention for the next 6 months, 1 year, I'm going to try to improve my self-compassion skill. I always, with the people I work with, I see a direct increase in resiliency and mental strength. For me, it's been transformational over the years, and I still have a long way to go with self-compassion, but I am completely different than I used to be. I used to be I was a self monster. I would just berate myself. The inner critic was so strong, and I'm much better at performing. I'm much happier now that I've significantly weakened that self-judge.
Yeah, you took out the ego in a big way. And I relate to it because when I've done really difficult things and I've been in a lower state of mind where I start to have these demons just get into my head, whether it's what someone else said or what I think about myself or something that happened, whatever the thing is, 10 years ago, like whatever it is, I'll just have something populate in my mind, and as if it's like this cloud over my character that I don't want to say atoned for, but it's not part of my identity anymore. And so you can't make space for who you're trying to become if you hold on to who you were. And so like you were saying, self-delusion, right? And like I was saying, I'm not saying excuse the poor performance or anything like that, because that's not what self-compassion's about. Like, it's about creating a space for yourself to heal so you could focus on doing the thing that you're trying to do better, faster, more effective, and like that fail, iterate, improve kind of thing, rather than like, it's okay, as if that's the more likely outcome that you'll repeat the mistake, right? And so I think that intention to improve has to be built in to whatever it is that you're going through. And for you to like talk about these topics, like we're talking about mental strength and we're talking about self-compassion, right? Like they don't sound like they go together. And something else that I talk about is that these things are, right, you talked about skills. I am very much in alignment with that. I call them practices. A lot of people treat them as destinations, and they don't realize that it's not something like, oh, I have arrived at self-compassion. Nah, like you could have it today and lose it tomorrow. Same thing with happiness, same thing with resilience, same thing with mental strength, same thing with fitness, same thing with mental fitness, any of these things. So like these are tools that have to be practiced on a daily basis. So it definitely resonated with me when you were talking about it as a skill. Like it's so important that people, attorneys or otherwise, understand these things, because we delude ourselves into thinking that, once we get to this place, we'll be happy. Right? Intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, fulfillment, purpose, passion, all these different words. We forget that we can reinvent passion, that we can change our purpose over time. We can build our purpose. And these are things that we can't cover all in one episode. I feel like we're going to have to do something else again very soon. But this has been great, man. It's so important, the work that you're doing. You know, you mentioned that you were working with a firm yesterday. Why don't you offer some insight into how people can work with you, where they can find you and keep up with everything that you're doing?
Sure. So definitely, I'm on LinkedIn pretty regularly. Try to post, several times a week. So I'm on there, and then nkbconsultancy.com. That's my wife's and my business. So you can find me on there, and always happy to chat with folks.
There's a question that I pose to all the guests on the podcast that I'm not going to pose to you. If the future version of yourself from 10 years from now were to fly in and offer you some advice in order to get there, what do you think they would say to you?
Follow your heart even more. Take more risks. It'll all be okay, and it'll all be worth it.
I love it. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Jarrett Green, thank you so much for the time today, man.
Thank you, Jonathan. It was such a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Jarrett Green, if you got any value out of this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. And stay tuned for more content coming your way. Once again, my name is Jonathan Cohen, and this is Inside the Inspired.